Blender is a free open source 3D creation suite used for modeling, animation, rendering, VFX, game assets, video editing, and more. It's completely free, no trial, no watermark. That's what makes it so powerful for both hobbyists and professionals. Let's download Blender. Head to blender.org, and on the top there's the download button, and in there you can find the download Blender option. The current version is 4.4.3, and if you want to see what's new in 4.4.3, you can click on this new in Blender 4.43 button, and you can see all the new features. And once you click on download, it will give you a donate to Blender page, including the download file pop-up. It's not necessary to donate, but if you are a fan of Blender, if you want to support the developers, it is greatly appreciated. Once downloaded, it's pretty straightforward. You click on the setup file. Now let's walk through the interface of Blender. So once you open Blender, you will have the option to create a new file. General 2D animation, sculpting, VFX, or video editing, any of these UIs you can open, but normally people don't even click on it. Just click outside the home box and you have the default cube. This is the default cube. Whenever you open a Blender file, this is what you get. Alright, so now you have opened Blender. I will show you some few settings you need to change to make your workflow smoother and faster. First things first, once you open Blender, you need to configure a few things. In preferences, in system, if you have a NVIDIA graphic card, you either select on CUDA or OptiX. If you have an AMD graphic card, HIP is the way to go, and if you have an Intel graphic card, one API is used. You have to go back to memory and limits, undo steps, you just increase it to 256. Alright, after that you go to save and load. Now you have your save versions, recent files, autosave timer, file preview, save prompt. This is basically to prevent crashes, to prevent like unsaved files crashes. So every 2 minutes your file will get auto-saved, and you have one version of your backup file. So you can increase the backup file, how many files you want as backup, 2, 3, maximum of 32 files, but usually go with one is enough, nothing else. But it saves every 2 minutes, auto saving every 2 minutes. This is the default settings. You don't have to change anything here. Next one, you close that window. You open render properties. Now here Blender has two inbuilt render engines. If you have used Maya or Max, you might be familiar with Arnold or V-Ray or something similar. In Blender, we have two inbuilt render engines, which is Eevee and Cycles. Workbench is not used for 3D renders, it's used for studio purposes. So we'll go with Cycles. Cycles is a render engine which gives you the realistic effect renders. Eevee has been getting updates recently, and it's being developed, and it's getting better and better with every update. Alright, let's stick with Cycles for now. And first things first, if you have a graphic card, you switch this to GPU compute. Once you switch that to GPU compute, you need to go to the viewport sampling and render settings, into the sampling settings, and reduce the sampling size of the viewport to 50. And in the render settings, change it to 200. And in the denoise section, you open image denoise, albedo and normal, accurate, high, and use GPU. Now this makes your renders use GPU instead of CPU, and it's much faster. Now Blender doesn't save this file, save these settings. Every time you open Blender, you have to redo all the settings again. To prevent that, you go to File, you go to defaults and you save the startup file. Once you save the startup file, it asks you to overwrite the startup file and you click on overwrite. Now your settings are saved. Now whenever you open a new file, these things will be saved in the file. I'll show you right now. I'm going to close Blender. I'm going to open Blender 4.4 again, and here we go. We have the exact same camera angle, including the camera angle. Everything is like how we saved the default file. Now one more thing, if you're working in a different unit, for example meters or feet or millimeters or centimeters, whatever you want, you can go to the scene settings, scene properties, click on units, and here you can change the system to metric or imperial. For example, if I want to work on feet, I click on imperial. Now I have the rotation in degrees, the length in feet, the mass in pounds, the time in seconds, the temperature in Kelvin. I can change this however I want. I can change the degrees to radians. I don't know what a radian is, but I was not good at maths, so we'll stick with degrees. Feet, inches, thou, miles, etc. So every single box you see in the grid, every single grid you see is 1 feet. So now, since I have selected my default settings, default units, what I will do is go back to file and save these defaults again. So now whenever you open the Blender file, you are always working in feet instead of meters. Now you have learned how to set up Blender settings. Let's move on. Blender's UI can be intimidating at first, but we'll break it down. Let's start with layout. In the layout, we add shapes, meshes, and whatever we want to add. Cameras, lights, and everything. In modeling, we edit the mesh as like edit mode, vertex edit, edge edit, face edit. That's basically what the basic of modeling tab is. Sculpting is where you sculpt your 3D models into whatever shape you want with the help of hundreds of these brushes. If you are already expert in ZBrush, you will know what you are doing. And if you're not, I'm going to teach you sculpting in the future episodes. Next up, we have UV editing, and this is where you insert textures and images and materials and unwrap it according to your 3D shape. Texture paint is where you paint your objects and get custom textures made. Shading is where you modify your materials into whatever you need, and it completely works on the node system. Animation is where you animate your object. Simple animations, complex animations, rigging, everything works here. Rendering is where you render your output through the Cycles render engine. Compositing is basically Photoshop built into Blender. Here you can add glow, you can add your contrast, your brightness, your whatever you want. You can have anything you need. What all you can do in Photoshop can be done here, and each and every final render can have that composite without taking the render to Photoshop to edit it manually over and over again. Geometry nodes is a completely different topic. We'll cover that in the future episodes. And scripting is something you can do to create add-ons or even import projects through scripts if you know Python. That's it. That's with all the workspaces covered. And there are a few more workspaces like 2D animation, VFX, and video editing that can be accessed with the plus icon here, and you can add it whenever you want. Now you have learned how to set up your Blender file and the basic purpose of each workspaces. Now let's learn to move around your scene. This is your 3D viewport. I have activated screencast keys so you can see in the bottom right corner that what buttons I am pressing. So middle mouse button and panning around your mouse gives you orbital mode, which orbits around the selected object. If you add shift to the middle mouse, you will pan the scene like this. And you can use the scroll wheel to zoom, or control mouse, middle mouse to zoom as well. Now a few more shortcuts. You can, if you want focus on one single object, you can click on that, go to view and click on frame selected. That will focus completely on the selected object, and you can orbit around that with your middle mouse button, and you can pan around that object with your middle mouse button plus shift. Another few shortcuts is numpad 1, 3, 7 and 0 to get right, left, top and bottom view respectively. You can also control the camera through your gizmo. You can click on the gizmo and just rotate around with your left click, or you can click on the y-axis to get your y view, your x-axis to get your x view, and z to get your z view, which is a top view usually. And you can also click on the minus versions of those three axes to get different views. Now if you don't have your numpad on your keyboard, and if you're using a small size keyboard and you have no access to 1, 3, 7 and 0 on the numpad, you can hold down Alt and drag your middle mouse button to the sides to get the axes: y-axis, x-axis, z-axis. If you want to go to the bottom, you have the minus z-axis, you have the minus y. You can just hold down Alt and just move your mouse in whatever axis you want, and that will lock your view into that angle. This is very useful if you don't have a full-size keyboard, but I suggest to get a full-size keyboard because more shortcuts rely on the full-size keyboard. For example, the numpad dot, which will also work as the same as frame selected. And if you want to get a camera view really quickly, you can press numpad 0. And that will give you your active camera view, and you can see what's going to render in your frame. That's not for now, but we'll get to that soon. Alright, so now we know how to navigate your 3D space. Now we'll learn object selection and modes. Let's work with the default cube, which is our channel's mascot. I will learn how to grab, rotate and scale. So it's easy to keep in mind. Grab, first letter is G. Rotate, first letter is R. Scale, first letter is S. And those are the keyboard shortcuts. G is for grab. Grab means to pick it up, move it around. That's grab. Rotate, you rotate things. X, Y, Z axis. Scale, make it big or small. And you can also use axis constraints using the X, Y, Z keyboard shortcuts. For example, you're grabbing something with G and you only want to move it through X axis. You click X after you press G. That means your move tool will only work on the X axis, even in whichever angle you are looking at. Alright, let's put this to test. Alright, I have the default cube here. Alright, now this red line is the X axis, green line is the Y axis, and the blue line is the Z axis, and it's not visible because it's up and down. Alright, so we have the default cube. I'm gonna just delete the light and the camera here. No need for that right now. We have the default cube. Now I press on G, grab. Now I have grabbed the item. I can move it in whatever direction I need. Alright, that is grab. Now I press on R, which is rotate. Now I can rotate it however I want. Alright, now let's scale the item. Let's scale it. Let's see. I press on S and it scales the item object, not item, sorry. It scales the object in all the axes. Now let's work on the constraints. Let's see how the constraints work. Now if I press G, then I press X, now it only moves in the X axis. Now if I press Y, it only moves in the Y axis. Now if I press Z, it only moves in the Z axis. Now there's a magic. Now let's say I need to move it in X and Y axis but not in the Z axis. Now that's why you give the not constraint. Like if you don't want to work it on the Z axis, you press Shift and Z. Now it will only work on the X and Y axis. Now if you press Shift X, it will work on the Y and Z axis. If you press Shift Y, it will work on the X and Z axis. So that is a not constraint. That means you are not constraining it to the other two, X and Y, but the Z. Now this is called a double constraint. So you're constraining it to X and Y and not Z when you press Shift Z and others. This thing will work for rotation as well. If you click on R, it will rotate in the view which you are looking at right now. But if you only want to rotate in X axis, you can click on X and it will rotate and it will only rotate in the X axis. If you press Y, it will only rotate in the Y axis, and if you press Z, it will only rotate in the Z axis. But you can still do the other not constraint thing. With Shift Z, you can rotate it in both X and Y axis. If you press Shift Y, it will rotate both in Z and X axis. If you press Shift X, it will rotate both in Y and Z axis. Same thing goes for scale. Let's test it out. If S for scale, now everything is scaling like equally, but if you press X, it only scales in the X axis. Now you have a cuboid instead of cube. Now if you press Y, it will scale in the Y axis. If you press Z, it will scale in the Z axis. Okay, now the same thing with the double constraint can be worked in the scale as well. Shift Z, you're scaling in X and Y axis. Shift Y, you're scaling in X and Z axis. Shift X, you're scaling in Y and Z axis. Alright, so now you know how to rotate, scale and move in different axes and constrain it to a specific axis to scale it in specific way. Alright, now let's say you want to edit this cube in whatever shape you want. Now this is where you go to edit mode. Now what's the difference between object mode and edit mode? Edit mode is when you want to reshape your object into whatever you want, add loop cuts, add meshes, increase the amount of polygons or bevel an edge, etc, etc. Let's test it out. Let's test the basics of edit mode. Now I click on tab. The only thing you need to do is click on tab to go to edit mode. Edit mode is fairly straightforward in Blender. You click on tab, now you can see your object is shining orange color. Alright, now here are the select modes. You have the vertex select, you have the edge select, and you have the face select. Edge select is usually yellow, it highlights the edges by yellow, and you have the face, which highlights the faces by orange. And the vertex, you will also see the dot in the vertexes. Alright, this is the edit mode basics. You have the vertex select, you have the edge select, you have the face select. Now there are shortcuts to these. You have one, not the numpad, the full keyboard, 1, 2 and 3 respectively for select mode vertex, select mode edge and select mode face. 1, 2 and 3, 1, 2 and 3, 1, 2 and 3. So you have to just quickly select vertex, edge or face from the keyboard itself. You don't have to go here and click all the time. So tab again tabs out to object mode, back to object mode, edit mode, object mode, edit mode, object mode. That's how easy it is to go to edit mode. Now, what's the difference? Here you make shapes, make meshes, make objects. Here in edit mode, you change the shapes, you add loop cuts. Now your object in the object mode has completely changed shape. We'll cover more of edit mode and how to change your shapes, how to make new shapes, how to modify your objects, how to bevel, how to add loop cut, everything in the next episode. So you have learned how to set up your Blender file, the Blender layout, the Blender workspaces, basic controls, and how to move around the 3D space. In the next episode, we'll deep deeper into manipulating an object using the edit mode and start your first modeling session. Make sure you save your file, and I will see you in episode 2.